Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Brew Hoop podcast. I'm Adam Paris, co-managing editor of brewhoop.com, broadcasting live from the home state of Punxsutawney Phil, who, as we found out, did not see his shadow this morning, Groundhog's Day, the day we're recording this. So early spring ahead. That's good news for you guys, Riley and Kyle, who are in the midst of a dead, cold winter. How are you doing over there?
I have to question the whole Punxsutawney, however you pronounce his name, Phil thing, because we've already seen plenty of fraudulent things coming out of Philadelphia, namely the basketball team on the road. And I already said a couple of weeks ago that I would not be talking too much trash, but with that road record, I think it's something that we need to acknowledge as there's not a good track record of things from Philly performing when you want them to. And so I'm not banking any sort of early spring. I'm expecting deep into March, April snowfall the entire time. So I'm doing well otherwise.
I'll let us say, I don't know what's more disappointing, people that are mad at a college student for deciding to leave a basketball program or the Brew Poop account's lack of dedication to trashing us on tweets. I don't know which one is more embarrassing and more sad. Probably the Brew Poop account. But then again, people are chastising a teenage college student for not wanting to work for free. I don't know. It's kind of sad. Everyone needs to get their priorities straight.
And speaking of doing things not the right way, how about the Washington Wizards defense earlier this week, people? Transition.
Wow, what a segue. That's why you're the podcast pro. Yeah, of course, the Washington Wizards, who have decided that defense shall be optional the entire season, coming into the game against the Milwaukee Bucks, where it came out that Giannis was not going to play. He had some right shoulder soreness. Obviously, it was in the wake of Kobe's passing as well, so maybe a little bit of emotional turmoil as well, although the organization, of course, chalked it up to the right shoulder. But that 151-131 W over the Washington Wizards was an incredible shootout between Chris Middleton and Bradley Beal. Chris Middleton goes for 51 points, 16 of 26 from the field, 7 of 10 from three, absolutely unconscious. We'll always have that, him hitting that triple, and then like Dragan Bender and DJ Wilson just losing their minds on the bench. Kudos to those guys. 10 rebounds, 6 assists for Middleton. Lost in the shuffle, of course, was Eric Bledsoe's 34 points, 6 rebound, 10 assist performance. Really nice game from him as well against a team that is more than willing to allow the opposing team just put up gaudy numbers, as evidenced by Dante also scoring 16 points, 6 of 9 from the field. Bucks are 55.6% overall, 51.4% from three, 19 of 37. Score a franchise record 88 points in the first half. And really, Riley, the first half was all Bucks. Second half, a little more Wizards, make it close. But in the end, this one was all really about Chris Middleton.
Yeah, and I think if people are looking around saying, what is Chris Middleton? Why is he a second star? Why is he somebody that we should keep around? Which sometimes I think is a somewhat valid question. It's nights like this that you point at and say, this is what he's capable of when the ball runs through his hands, when the offense. And I thought it was the fourth quarter, especially where I don't know how close it got. It was like relatively tight given the fact that the Bucks had a 30-some point lead at some point or another during the game. But there were so many possessions in a row where the Bucks, even though they usually play at such a high pace without Giannis out there, they had to adjust how they attacked it a little bit. And so what they did instead was we're going to work to find some sort of mismatch, either getting a switch or whatever it is for Chris, in the mid-range, in the post, whatever the situation happens to be, get the ball to him. And over again, Chris was able to convert. And what was impressive was the fact that Washington had to know after like the third or fourth possession that it was coming, and yet they weren't able to stop him. And even when Chris did end up getting the balls in his hands, he didn't necessarily always take the shot. He also was looking for teammates when he was kind of generating that gravity through his just presence. And so it's pretty rare, given the way that the Bucks generally play and the presence of Giannis out there, that a dominating performance like this is in the cards for Middleton. But the fact that he's able to flash this again against one of the worst defenses in the league, but systematically to not be stopped time after time in a tight situation where you needed to convert because everybody was scoring on both ends. There was defense optional was the subtitle of this game. And so it was impressive. You can nod at this and say, this is what he's capable of. It's just a matter of will the team, will Coach Bud, and will Chris actually go out and make that happen in other games where Giannis is out there?
Yeah, and I think you make an excellent point in talking about how the Wizards knew what was coming, but they still couldn't stop him. And obviously Chris Middleton had that amazing drive to the bucket and that dunk at the end to put an exclamation mark on his game, not just a basic punctuation mark.
Yeah, put a comma on it. He put a.
No, it was definitely a semicolon.
But I mean, I think the most impressive part about it is, yeah, the Wizards have the league's worst defense and everything. Their on-ball defenders aren't anything to sneeze at. But I mean, Chris Middleton is getting almost all of these points from just his pure shooting ability, his ability to shoot from the mid-range. It's not like he's decimating them down low, and he got to the free throw line a good chunk of times. But it's really just his shooting ability and his isolation ability. And it also led to that iconic picture after the game, Kyle, with the 51 on a piece of paper and then in black and white.
Yeah, it was kind of funny that Giannis was originally warming up, but then no one saw him at the bench, and Giannis is just chilling in the back and deciding, I'm going to make a meme out of this. So it's kind of funny how that all worked out. But I think kind of what you're saying with Chris Middleton shooting, it was at a point where it seemed possible that both Middleton and Bledsoe could have gotten 50 in the night, because Bledsoe, I know in the first half had 20-something points, I believe. So to see those two in particular just start off really hot, especially in Giannis's absence, was a good sight to see. Again, we know the Wizards may not play defense, but they still have competent NBA players. So it's good to see them do this, against NBA caliber players. It's not like they're playing a G League team of the Chicago Bulls or anything. It was just simply the Wizards. I don't know if they just choose not to play defense or just, I don't know. They shouldn't be that bad defensively, but I guess when you have David Bertans, Bradley Beal, and Isaiah Thomas, yeah, those guys aren't going to play any defense whatsoever. But going back to Middleton, it was kind of how consistent he was able to do it as well. It never seemed like he never caught fire, never had like a Klay Thompson 20, 30 point quarter. It was just consistently just gets 10 points each time he was in the game, and when he got subbed out, then Bledsoe would take over and he would get another 5 or 10, and then Chris Middleton would come back in and he would get another 10, 15. It was just the consistency of how he was doing it. It wasn't necessarily the kind of explosion type of scoring. It was just throughout the whole game, it was just a chipping away. And I think if the game didn't get as close in the second half as it was starting to, I believe Chris Middleton would have sat with 40 something, but yeah, it was just cool to see. And the questions on if he's a second star or whatever, I think we're at the point now where we know Chris's skill set is the perfect complement for Giannis. And if Milwaukee needs anything, they need a number 3 that they can rely on more than if Chris Middleton is a good enough number 2. Because I think Chris Middleton has proven that he can be a good enough number 2.
I think if I can jump in real quick right there, what's interesting about this game and just talking about Chris and what he brings to the table is maybe I think I agree with you, Kyle, that the questions about him being a potential number 2, I think we see games like this and other games where he puts out a high point total or he's really feeling it from mid-range, and we say, I don't think that's the case, that he's not a number 2, but is he essentially a victim generally and just with the way that Budenholzer ball is played, that he can never really shine like that? And if Giannis is out there, I think we should give a nod to the fact that Chris appears to have adjusted his style so that he can fit within what Budenholzer, while still also getting his mid-range every once in a while. But you see a lot of, after a game like this, where it's like, why can't Chris do this every single game? And I think that's a fair question. I think most of that comes down to the way the Bucks play strategically on offense. But then that kind of makes me a little concerned because, all credit again to Middleton for being willing to do what's asked of him. But if you're in like a playoff game and Giannis is still out there and the general idea is we're still going to do what we do, is it possible or is it a little bit too difficult for Chris in the flow of a game where like, okay, our usual thing is not working, for him to then adjust and be like, I'm going to do the takeover thing? So I think that's kind of a sub trend or a sub idea to this game where it's like, yes, it was really impressive. Not sure if we'll see it happen all that often if Giannis, if there are games where Giannis sits maybe, but that is something in the playoffs where is he capable of turning it on like that? I think he is, but is he going to be capable / is the coaching staff willing and the rest of the roster willing to let it happen? And obviously everybody was happy for him when it was happening. And when he's that on, you have to go to him, but it is kind of an interesting fold for the playoffs.
He has I mean, and I feel like we've talked about this in the past as well, as he has the type of game that seems like it would lend itself well to the playoffs, right? The defenses tighten down, they clamp down. You might have to get a few more isolation points than you would in the past. He's a guy who can shake his defender. He's tall. He can get a shot off over just about anyone, unless he's being bothered by, really the elite of the elite defenders, which is what he will face in the playoffs. But I think you're right, Riley, that for him, it's kind of a mindset and trying to get himself in the headspace that, okay, if he has one of those nights where he goes 3 of 13 or whatever, right? I think that's one of the reasons that we can see him. He might be on one night and off, is that he's not, for the most part, he's not like getting any easy buckets, right? Like the
Tough Shot Express is alive and well for Chris,
right? He's not breaking down defenders and really getting to the rim. He's not even getting many free throw attempts per game. He's only at like 4.5 per 36. So he's not a guy who, like, if he's struggling and his shot is struggling, he's kind of just not going to, maybe he's just not going to have it that game, right? Like, he's not going to be like, if Giannis isn't, his mid-range isn't falling, his three-point isn't falling, usually he can still kind of get to the free throw line. But Chris's game is, I don't want to call it one-dimensional because of the way he plays, but it does feel a little bit more that way, Kyle, that it's tough for him to get going if he's struggling with his shot.
Well, it's not even if he's struggling with his shot. It just kind of like what we've noticed in the past. He's not as aggressive enough as maybe he should be. Just with sometimes when he, especially in the playoffs against Toronto, it seems like he was spending so much time trying to guard Kawhi. And when they made the switch that Kawhi would guard Giannis, Chris Middleton didn't really take as much of an advantage as we would have liked. And I think that's really, maybe that was just him still trying to get used to the Bud system. And we've talked about how, we don't ideally want him to go on the Tough Shot Express, but at the same time, it's kind of that fine balance between wanting the Tough Shot Express, but also wanting to make sure he takes the best shot that he can get. And I think that's something that he's still trying to figure out, especially when Giannis is on the court, just because we see two different styles of play. When Giannis isn't playing, he's willing to go Tough Shot Express. He's willing to fire those threes. He's willing to be that guy. While when Giannis plays, it seems like he's more kind of deferring a little bit more and letting Giannis kind of dictate the play, which is fine because obviously you want to give your best player the ball when the time calls for it. But it's going to be one of those where if there is an elite defender, is it going to be the same concept? And then again, I don't know what elite defender there is in the Eastern Conference right now that's not on the Miami Heat, but who knows?
Well, and to Chris's credit, I mean, there's a reason why the guy is putting up career per 36 numbers, especially on the offensive end. Like, he seems to be a lot more aggressive or a lot more willing to exploit mismatches when they come his way, whereas maybe in years past, especially last year where he was kind of figuring out what to do with what Budenholzer wanted, maybe it was a little bit more reticent or a little more willing to try and move the ball. Whereas this year he seems more willing or even more empowered to, when he sees a mismatch, when he sees a situation that he feels comfortable in, he just kind of goes for it, even if he's not having a comfortable shooting night.
Yeah, and he was pretty comfortable in this Nuggets game that we'll move on and talk about a little more now. There's a little bit more substance there, given it was a loss for the Bucks, and those always feel like more instructive things to talk about at this point in the season. Even though I generally tend to. It was funny. I didn't watch the game Friday night. I had to rewatch it, and I just saw that they had lost, and I was like, well, okay. I bet Denver shot pretty well from 3, and then I looked, and I was like, yep, that's exactly what happened. So the Nuggets, just do an overview of this game. Nuggets shoot 22 of 46 from 3, 47.8%. Bucks are 12 of 40 from three-point land, just 30%. Giannis finishes with 31 points, 16 rebounds, 9 assists. Chris, 24 points, 9 assists on just 11 shots. Really impressive from him. 15 points, 7 assists from Eric Bledsoe. George Hill, I think one of the big stories for me is George Hill and Dante DiVincenzo were out, which thrust Pat Connaughton and Sterling Brown into the lineup. Really that it seemed like the Bucks kept let this one stay a little too close, Riley, especially in that first half, given how well it seemed like they played. And then the Nuggets were just able to overtake them in the second.
Yeah, I think we were talking before we started recording that it was remarkable how well Milwaukee played on the offensive end, especially in the first half, and yet they go into the break still only up 7, which is like, things that make you go, when you see that sort of situation. And so all it really took, again, it was like another defense optional. In this case, it was more so this was a team where we've seen in the past that if a team really wants to gun from 3, the Bucks are obviously absolutely okay with the team trying to do that. And historically, at least this season, the Nuggets are like either a really great 3-point shooting team or one that takes a lot of them generally. So this is a little bit of a one-off, but I think it proves the ability of teams to see whatever the Bucks do or what they allow on offense. And I think it was even more remarkable because the Nuggets had gotten in from Milwaukee at like 4 a.m. and they had just played a tough back-to-back against the Jazz the night before. And so instead of maybe trying to do whatever they normally do, which is probably run a lot through Jokic on the offensive end, is like, all right, we're just going to gun for threes, and it ends up working out. And then, like I said, without George Hill out there, without Dante out there, you're forced putting like Kyle Korver for a lot of minutes, Sterling Brown for a lot of minutes, and Sterling does not have it this season, it doesn't seem like. And Kyle, I mean, he's fine every once in a while with his threes, but when he goes 0 for 2 and he's just kind of out there generally for 17 minutes, it's going to be probably one where he's getting picked apart a little bit. And then the same thing for like Pat Connaughton. And so strangely enough, it seemed like the Bucks were the team that didn't have the legs or the depth, even though they had only played the Wizards, like 3 days before, had all the rest beforehand coming back from Paris. And so I don't know how much of it is, again, kind of lackadaisacaling around and letting the other team really get into it from 3, and you just kind of chalk it up to that versus if there was some sort of deeper issue to go into from Milwaukee's end.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It was tough for me as I was watching it to find a huge deep issue. I mean, I thought, to Denver's credit, they did a really, really nice job on Giannis when he got down low, doubling him right in the paint.
There was no room whatsoever. There were multiple times where he tried to like gather for a shot attempt, and they just did not give him any sort of space to do it.
No, really nice effort by them. And Denver, I think they're ranked, when I was looking before, they were like 25th in terms of defending the rim, in terms of stopping other teams at the rim. And the Bucks are obviously one of the best teams in the league at finishing down there, and they hold the Bucks to well below their season average there. So all the credit to them. That was something that I thought they did really well. Obviously they hit their threes, but there were a lot of times, Kyle, and it shows out if you look at what would have been the real starting lineup. We'll talk about Thanasis starting, I guess, in a little bit here, but like with Brook, like between Brook Lopez, Giannis, Wesley Matthews, and Eric Bledsoe, they go a combined 3 for 20 from 3. And that's off some really good looks. Giannis was creating some really good looks. Eric Bledsoe was creating good looks. And there were a couple times where Brook just couldn't get the ball to go in when it seemed like there were some pivotal moments. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, kind of like how Riley was saying, how Milwaukee was playing that well offensively and still only had a slim lead at halftime. I was thinking the upset. I was thinking, well, Denver's shooting the ball really, really well, and the Bucks are still up, this much without George Hill, without Dante DiVincenzo. So it's kind of, I was thinking the opposite. I was thinking this is probably a good thing because I don't think Denver's going to continue shooting this well, and I was badly wrong. And I think it was just with that starting lineup, and Thanasis starting, definitely pandering to the Greek crowd, but we can talk about more of that later. But there were a lot of good looks, especially for Wes and Brook. And now, Riley, I know you mentioned it. I don't remember how long ago, but maybe it was yesterday on a Twitter thread. But Brook's shooting has been bad this year. And at what point do we figure out this is how it's going to be and it's not going to change? Or how do we change it? Or is it going to improve? And I'm starting to think we might have to assume that Milwaukee's going to have 2 subpar 3-point shooters on the court out of the starters in Giannis and Brook. And you hope that Wes continues getting the good looks that he did and can hit those shots. And you hope that Bledsoe might take some of those open looks. And you just hope that Chris Middleton is that flamethrower. And I think that was one of the bigger differences in this game was Milwaukee's good looks weren't falling while Denver's good looks were falling. But when you think of how to beat the Bucks, you need to shoot the ball well. You need to hope Milwaukee doesn't shoot well, which they didn't. They were, I think, 12 of 40. It was like 12 of 40 from 3. You have to make sure that Giannis has an okay game, not great, just okay. And he played a little bit better in the first half, but in the second half, he seemed like he was forcing his shot a lot more. And then you just have to, just hope that things go your way. And for Denver, it did. And this isn't a new thing. We saw this with San Antonio. We saw this with Philly. We saw this in the Boston and Miami comebacks. when Milwaukee's shots don't fall, they don't seem to have a plan B. And you can appreciate Pat Connaughton and his effort, Sterling Brown and his effort, but they just were, it seemed like Milwaukee was out hustled, which I wouldn't have expected considering Denver playing a tough game the day before and flying in late. That's kind of the thing that I think was more of an issue for Milwaukee. And it shows with Dante's energy and George Hill's just calm steadiness that those two are very vital to Milwaukee's rotation. And ironically, despite Thanasis starting, it seemed like his energy was actually helpful for Milwaukee, especially at the beginning of the game.
Well, and I just want to talk about another thing that was unique, at least in my eyes, from this game, and probably something that is a through line for a lot of the games that the Bucks have lost, which is the other team shoots really well from three, but two other things that were notable. One, I think Jokic is an interesting defensive matchup for Milwaukee because we know how the drop scheme works, right? So like you're going to try and attack wherever the pick is being set, and then Brook is going to just kind of fall back into the paint. And the way that Denver seemed to go every single time down, and again, I don't watch a lot of Nuggets basketball, but I'm assuming it's the way they do it a lot, is they try and get Jokic into his spot, which is like sort of like at the top of the paint or like around the block sort of, and just get him the ball and let him either go for it himself or operate and keep an eye out for what his teammates are doing to find him in passing space. And so that's difficult because Brook, he's sort of neutralized in that situation where he's forced to kind of man up against, or, you know, if it's Brook, if it's Thanasis, whoever was out there, even Giannis a little bit in the second half, where they're forced to kind of keep on Jokic, and that takes a player out of the possession, essentially, where Jokic isn't really doing anything other than standing there, but he's still enough of a threat where you have to have a guy right on him. And so when you neutralize that, and then you have a team where the rest of the players is like, all right, we're just going to just shoot from three either right away in the possession or work the ball around after getting the guy in the paint or having a second guy kind of help out in the paint against Jokic. That kind of exposes Milwaukee in that situation and makes it a lot more difficult to get stops. And then the other thing I wanted to point out was, you know, and a lot of the losses this year, some of them are a little fluky, but some of them I think are notable in that, like, you have the Nuggets, you have Jokic, who is a singular talent who it makes it difficult to really adjust against. You have the Spurs where you have DeMar DeRozan. He's difficult to adjust against. You have the Sixers where they have, you know, like an Embiid, he's difficult to adjust against. And so I think it is notable that there are teams that have a singular talent on the offensive end, and Milwaukee has yet to really adjust or find a way to stop them. And again, it's regular season. They've only lost 7 games, so it's not that big of a deal, but just something to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, and I think another thing, yeah, obviously Jokic is so fascinating too, because he also, if he's sort of working from the top of the arc and he's surveying the floor, you have to pull Brook up at least a little bit, which, you know, opens up the rim and everything to backdoor cuts. The Nuggets end up shooting about 60% at the rim, granted on low volume, but that's significantly better than the Bucks, you know, average. The average on average, they hold teams like 55%. I think the other thing that flipped this game was the Bucks, when the Nuggets went small and they would have like Jeremy Grant in at center. I mean, Grant finishes like a plus 21 on the night, but it was just like so clear that Brook Lopez couldn't stick with him. And then as the Bucks had to try and counter and go small on their own, they just did not have the horses without George Hill and Dante DiVincenzo. Like, you know, that lineup a couple games ago where it was like Chris, Giannis, Eric Bledsoe, George Hill, Dante. It was like, this version was like Giannis, Chris, Pat Connaughton, Korver,
Thanasis or Thanasis minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it was like you as soon as like the Bucks went to switching defense, it was like PJ Dozier, which is like a dude I would never ever even think of, is like immediately breaks down Kyle Korver super easily off the dribble and just like destroys him. Or like Monty Morris gets around Pat Connaughton and like is able to finish at the rim, whereas like that might be a play where like Dante or George Hill is able to corral a relatively okay player like that, as opposed to letting them just get unimpeded to the rim. It's just like, it's those little marginal differences that when the Nuggets go small and they have like a really athletic guy like Jeremy Grant, and the Bucks just aren't able to counter, and they don't have like the type of defenders in Pat Connaughton or Kyle Korver who are able to play like that. It's just pretty clear to me, Kyle, that like that, those are those margins against a team that's as good as the Nuggets that the Bucks just can't overcome if they're missing guys like that.
Right.
Like that Hill. Yeah.
Yeah, you can get away with it when you're playing the Washington Wizards or the Charlotte Hornets or the Chicago Bulls or the Indiana Pacers, but you can't get away with it when you're talking about a team as talented as the Denver Nuggets. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and also Grant had like 7 blocks in this game, which is insane. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened.
No. Also, I have to say, like, this does feel like the game that, and we've said it millions of times, but like, how can DJ Wilson not get in this game? Like, Ersan Ilyasova played 8 minutes. It was clear he couldn't handle like being out on the floor at all, and like DJ Wilson doesn't even get a sniff. Like,
I did say that in our group chat. I was like, this is the end. There's no way he is going to be on the roster after the trade deadline.
The only thing was, I don't remember. So they played, him and Dragan played in Oshkosh the night before, which, I mean, is the G League, no disrespect. So obviously they probably should have still had some energy, but I don't know if that would have played into it at all. I think they would have been assigned back to the team, but yeah, I don't know. It's just the usual sad dirge of DJ, but you know what? He's got a guaranteed year next year, so good for him anyhow. Yeah,
that's true. Anything else from this one? I guess we could mention that Thanasis started. It was Greek Heritage Night. I was all ready for it to be like atrocious, but he actually didn't even seem to harm the team that much in his first 5 minutes, besides like getting, pulling a Thon Maker and getting 2 fouls in those 5 minutes.
He seemed really energetic, and he like got into Jokic's grill a couple of times on defense, which was cool. And it was a magical opening for Giannis to get the steal and get it to a streaking Thanasis for a dunk on the other end. Like, you couldn't ask for a better beginning. And then that position where Giannis is driving to the paint, he kind of Euro steps and then finds Thanasis with the pass underneath the basket for the and one. I thought that was really cool, but I, for one, am okay if we continue to not see a lot of Thanasis plays, because that jumper is broke, man. It is not great. So whatever. Shout out to Thanasis. I don't think he was necessarily the issue since he still only played 5 minutes, but whatever. Just weird lineups, I guess.
Yeah, I would say if this was DJ Wilson or back in the day Christian Wood or Thon Maker, Bucks Twitter would be losing its shit if they had played the same way that Thanasis did. So good on Thanasis.
Good on Thanasis. Weird game, man. Weird game. There was like two straight jump balls at one point. Dr. Dave waved both his arms after a Giannis 3 as opposed to just one. Weird stuff.
You needed 2 calls to get in touch with David Gruber instead of 1. There was just a lot of weird stuff going on.
Speaking of I guess not weird stuff, Chris Middleton was selected as an All-Star reserve for the 2nd year in a row. We'll move on to a little bit of All-Star talk. Good for Chris. I think we talked about him plenty about that 51 points. It was sort of a perfect way to lead right into him being selected again as a reserve. Hopefully Giannis will pick him pretty early on. I think he had a quote. He's like, "Yeah, I'd be pretty pissed off if like my own teammate didn't pick me first or whatever." But I don't know. Kudos to Chris Kyle for what he's done this year.
Yeah, he was a deserved All-Star, and it could have been argued that he could have maybe snuck in a starter if he was a little bit more popular, but he's 100% an All-Star. I don't think there was any surprise on that. Most of the other reserves that were picked were pretty straightforward, except maybe one player, in which we'll talk about. But I'm happy for Chris. The fact that last year he got it was what we saw as a breakthrough, and then, okay, he got his one All-Star bid. Probably he might get another one, might not. So good for him. But to see him not only improve on last year, but kind of solidify his case of I'm going to be a consistent All-Star, it's pretty cool to see. And for a guy that was a throw-in trade way back then, 6 years later to now, it's kind of cool to see how he has grown as a player. And Bud said it. If you follow basketball, you know how talented he is. And I think that's something that we kind of take for granted just because of how his game is and how he's not really the flashy type of guy. And we can talk on the whole contract situation before, but Chris Middleton's an All-Star. I actually think he can make another 2 or 3 in his time in Milwaukee. So good for him. Happy for him. And hopefully we get another moment last year in the All-Star game where he kind of hits 3 points in a row right when he comes into game.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I think, yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Riley.
No, I was just going to follow up, agree with all that. And I think the other thing is before the season, it'd be fair to worry a little bit, like, how much is he going to be able to play up to the new contract? And I'm not sure he'll be able to justify what the end costs of the final years of the contract are, but no doubt this season, at least, he's played up to the value that he's being paid as much as you could reasonably expect. So I agree with all Kyle, and just want to point that out as well.
Yeah, 100%. The only other thing I was going to say is I feel like sometimes there's discussion about we shouldn't have an East All-Star reserve and a West All-Star reserve. We should just pick the best players or whatever. But I think even in that case and scenario, I think Chris Middleton still would have made it over maybe like Chris Paul, Brandon Ingram, and Russell Westbrook. I don't know if he would have been like over Gobert or whatever, but like I think it's pretty cool to look at the totality of the reserves and still think Chris Middleton belongs. One guy who didn't make it was Eric Bledsoe. A lot of lobbying from his teammates. Giannis, of course, I mean, unsurprisingly, he's like, well, I think we should have had 3, maybe 4 All-Stars.
I think Thanasis probably should have gotten the nod, is what Giannis was implying with that.
Yeah, of course. Reading between the lines, of course, that's what he was saying. But I thought we'd take a look at Bledsoe, maybe compare him to some of the other players in the East. I know for me personally, I didn't feel that offended that he didn't make it. You know, he did miss some games, and obviously the Bucks have won a lot of games, but I don't really always feel like that entitles the team to have a certain, set number of All-Stars. I guess looking at the group of other East All-Star reserves, we got Bam Adebayo, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry, Chris Middleton, Domantas Sabonis, Ben Simmons, and Jason Tatum. So out of those guys, Kyle, are there anyone that you think Eric Bledsoe might be more deserving than?
Kyle Lowry. I don't know what the justification for Kyle Lowry was, because we were complaining about, Trae Young making it, and wins don't matter, and it's all about stats. Okay, fine, but Eric Bledsoe has better stats than Kyle Lowry. And then you kind of look at the opposite end, and it's like, okay, well, wins matter, and that's why, maybe we leave a guy like Bradley Beal out because his team isn't winning. Well, Eric Bledsoe's part of a 41-7 record team. So I don't know where the justification was, and it seems like it's more of a, you've been an All-Star before, so we'll give you the benefit of the doubt, we'll give you the nod, similar to how it seems Russell Westbrook got an All-Star bid over Devin Booker. So that's the only player that I could argue, just because you compare the two side by side and they play the same position, and Eric Bledsoe, in my opinion, has had a better season than Kyle Lowry.
So these are all selected by coaches, right, Riley?
Yes, correct. I believe, I don't know if it's just like every coach puts in their, I'm guessing that's how it works, is every coach puts in like a little survey or whatever and points out their guys that they pick. I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Well, how did you feel about it? Like, did you think he was more deserving than any of those guys? I could see the Kyle Lowry one. I think they've had pretty similar seasons, but I also feel like coaches are Kyle Lowry's now made it 5 or 6 times, and he kind of feels like he's on the conveyor belt, and coaches like him, and he's in the limelight of winning a championship last year. So like maybe that gets him the nod over Bledsoe.
Yeah, I'm not like too upset about it because there's a couple of different things. So yes, Eric has played really well this season. I'm not sure if he's played like anything beyond what we've seen him do in the past. And like you have like Kyle Lowry, like he's already on the conveyor belt. He also has stepped up a little bit, especially with like his offensive duties with Kawhi being gone and with how good Toronto's still playing. I mean, they're the 2nd seed in the East right now, I do believe. And it's difficult. We think it's tough enough already for Chris to get enough shine as like a flashy player, given the second option beneath Giannis. Like, can you imagine in the national zeitgeist how much more difficult it is to do that as Eric Bledsoe, which, obviously a really good player, but he doesn't have what I would say is the flashiest game. It's very like workman-like, especially on the defensive end where a lot of his impact is at. And like per 36 minute stats are cool and everything, but when you're only averaging like 26-ish minutes a night, and with the injuries that he's had this year, and it seems like he's more consistent this season than last season, but there's still times where he's, a couple games in a row, it's like, where's Eric at? Is he going to help out here, or what's happening there? So I'm not like super upset about it. I don't think whether or not his teammates really lobbied for him, obviously that's doing the right thing by your teammate, but I'm not upset about it at all.
Yeah, I wasn't that upset either. I could like maybe see it over Jason Tatum or whatever. Like I guess it's cool that one of those wings got in between him and Brown. But like, if I'm just looking at guys in the backcourt, I feel like the other thing with the per 36 is, and I know it gets hammered down our throats. So like as Bucks fans, I definitely know to like look at it right away. And as like I would say relatively informed basketball fans, we all know that per 36 is like a pretty good baseline that we should use as opposed to per game.
Yep.
And I'm sure coaches know that too or whatever, but I do feel like sometimes it's like, yeah, I don't know. He's playing 26 minutes. He's averaging this amount of points per game. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me go to Basketball Reference and look up the per 36 numbers for these guys real quick as well. Compare them all that. Like, I feel like sometimes maybe it's easier, and I'm sure they have stats guys who can do this or whatever for them. But like, I feel like on some level, like the per 36 thing, just like it's not going to totally be ingrained in your consciousness yet.
Yeah. Anytime you're working within the land of the theoretical, like, yes, in theory, over the course of a long enough sample size, that should show out as being something that's factual. But, especially with the way that Milwaukee plays, guys get such low minute totals, which is part of the strategy. It's going to be hard inherently for anybody else other than like one or two guys to get shine. And Giannis is obviously undeniable, and he has the popularity, and you want to give a guy like Chris a nod as well, just because the team has played so well, and so has he. But once you get past that, it's hard to justify a third guy, I think. So maybe there are like injury issues, he might get picked, but I think guys like probably Bradley Beal would be ahead of him if we're just looking at who's going to get picked up as like a star guy who has the recognition for it. So I don't even expect, if there are injury guys, for Eric to make it, which to me isn't that big of a deal. Like, just take the week off and rest and relax or whatever.
Yeah, like I'm not heartbroken Eric Bledsoe didn't make it. If there was a player that I would have to pick, it would have been Kyle Lowry, but It seems like this year a lot of people are airing out their grievances with being snubbed, whether it's from the All-Star game or a Rising Stars game. I don't know.
Look at that transition over to another guy who was snubbed. Kyle, that's why you are actually the podcast pro, not I.
And of course, we're talking about Dante DiVincenzo, one of the finest basketball players in the land, sophomore. Yeah. Clear snub. It's obvious, much more than Matisse Thybulle, but he took it in stride, unlike Matisse Thybulle's agent. And so, Dante DiVincenzo doesn't make the Rising Stars game. I believe he would qualify as a U.S. roster person, because I don't know if he did all the paperwork required to potentially play for the Italian team last year, or if he would be able to then, if he said he played for the Italian team. I don't know. Either way.
Not a clue.
Yeah. I don't know why I should have had you look that up, Riley, to see if that's something we could have done. But
he's Italian in my eyes, at least. So I don't know if the NBA cares about that, but in my eyes, he's Italian.
Okay, I'm going to read through the guys that made it for the U.S. roster. And then, Kyle, who do you think? Let's see if there's anyone you think he should have made it over. Okay, so they have Miles Bridges, Wendell Carter Jr., Devontae Graham, Tyler Herro, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, Kendrick Nunn, Eric Pascal, PJ Washington, Zion Williamson, and Trae Young. Is there anyone you think he should have made it over from those guys?
I don't follow enough of these other teams, especially, a guy like Eric Pascal, who I didn't know existed until just now. So my gut wants to say Miles Bridges and Wendell Carter Jr., but maybe Kendrick Nunn, but because I know Kendrick Nunn had the really hot start to the season. I don't know. Again, I've not been paying attention to any of most of these players other than the two from Memphis and Zion, and I guess Trae Young as well. But I would say Miles Bridges is the one name that stands out as like, I feel like he hasn't done anything spectacular all year. But again, this is me not knowing most of these, like how their seasons are going. And a lot of these guys are on pretty bad teams besides Tyler Herro, Kendrick Nunn. Yeah, everyone else is all these other teams are kind of trash right now.
I would say, yeah, I'm curious, what's up with Charlotte getting 3 nods? Like, the Bucks can't get 3 All-Stars, but Charlotte gets 3 consolation prizes in the Rising Stars game. That seems a little questionable. I would be curious, like, since Trae Young is also a starter in the All-Star game, is he going to perform in both, or will he bow to one, and does that open up a possibility for Dante? I don't know. This is another thing where I don't feel super strongly. I think I'm actually a little surprised that Dante didn't make it, because I think for the most parts, he's had a really impressive season. It's not like he doesn't have the stat totals or like the counting numbers to justify it either. Like, he's just an interesting, fun player to watch on both ends, and I think that would translate well to a game like this. But, what do I know?
Oh, well, I was thinking the opposite. I was like, I don't know if like a does stuff guy is really what you want in a Rising Stars game. Like, I don't know if you want like Dante DiVincenzo like D'ing up a guy. Like, look at his quick feet. How does he recover so quickly around that?
Look at the way he tried to jump for that rebound. Almost died doing it again.
Yeah,
I suppose that's true. But I mean, when we watch games, I mean, I think he's pretty fun to watch. On maybe that's an indictment on me or as us as like basketball fans, or just like Milwaukee Bucks fans, but I think he's somewhat fun to watch. Like, he's compelling offensively, and if you're looking for a dude who's not going to steal a lot of shine from the other dudes on offense, like, he's the one to go. But I doubt whoever's picking these teams thought that deeply about it. I have no idea what the criteria is. So maybe when they do like does stuff, maybe that's pretty low in importance for guys who make it to the roster. So
yeah, well, kudos to you, Dante DiVincenzo, for having a great season. You will never, ever, ever be selected for the Rising Stars game, but
he's too good for it anyway. It's fine. Just like Summer League.
Yeah, exactly.
You're our rising star, Dante, and I know that means a lot coming from the Poooooood podcast, which I'm sure you listen to between games.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for an ad, and on the other side of this, we're going to do just a little bit of trade talk and then go to our rapid fire questions, a little bit of vulture talk, and then head on out. So stay tuned. All right, guys, we are back, and it's time to do a little ridiculous trade chatter. There was a report this week from incredibly reputable source, Rick Bucher, who this was from him. He says one league source says, so just one. He doesn't get confirmation on that. One league source says the Memphis Grizzlies offered Andre Iguodala to the Milwaukee Bucks for the 2020 protected first-round pick that they acquired from Malcolm Brogdon. While adding Iguodala's playmaking ability, postseason pedigree, and defense to the team with the league's best record is tantalizing, it would be a Rubik's Cubezian challenge to construct a deal that would allow Milwaukee to absorb his $17.2 million contract. So did you have any initial just reactions to that report that Memphis would be willing to accept that first-round pick from Milwaukee in exchange for Andre Iguodala? Kyle?
It made sense for both sides. Memphis gets another draft pick to go along with. I mean, they're looking potentially having two picks in the 15 to 20 something range, which would be good for them as their team gets younger and they can build a core around it. And for Milwaukee, it would have been that wing that everyone would have wanted, someone that can defend and someone that can shoot and, has that veteran experience. But I don't know how that cap space would have worked. And maybe you would have likely had to get rid of Ersan and DJ Wilson and Pat Connaughton. And so the cap, how that works cap-wise would have been confusing since we know the ownership group wouldn't want to go into the tax. So I guess, sure, with this trade, if it were to happen, I wouldn't hate it, but the logistics don't make sense.
Yeah, it feels a little like, obviously it's just Memphis, and I think they actually owe their pick this year to Boston. So they're clearly trying to recoup a little bit of value for Iguodala, like they've been trying to do the entire year. It feels like the Bucks would have to bend over backwards with their roster to try and make like a $17 million deal of Andre Iguodala even like fit, and with the contracts that they have. So I was, I know but you felt pretty strongly that the Bucks should move the first round pick regardless, right, Riley?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Andre is the guy that I want to do that for, though. So two things. One, I can only imagine how hard Rick Bucher was fist pumping when he came up with Rubik's Cubezian. I mean, that's an editor's dream right there to have that kind of phrase going on. The other thing is, I'm not a disrespecter of Iggy or anything like that. Like, that dude was a god in NBA 2K a couple of years ago, so shout out to him for that. But he seems to be in like a weird place this season, because when he got traded to the Grizzlies, I don't know if he like threw a fit, but I think he already told him straight, I was like, I'm just not going to play. And a couple weeks ago, he was like on ESPN on The Jump talking about his sabbatical year off. So I don't know if this is a dude who's in the right mindset where you're going to trade all those assets and then like just hope he turns it on. Like, I'm sure he's in a good place physically, or as good of a place as he possibly could be, but I don't know if I feel like trading the first rounder plus all those other guys where you're, sapping potentially any sort of depth. I mean, we talked in the past about how much does the depth go past like the top 8 dudes. That's an open question, but it really, whatever you would have to do to make the deal and get rid of the first, just to see whether or not Iggy gives a damn or even wants to suit up and play, because it seems like he's perfectly content with not doing that with Memphis. So I don't know. I'm not sure if that's something that I would be super duper interested in. Maybe, if he was a buyout guy, then I'd be a lot more on board, but to kind of throw all that at a guy who's a gamble, like obviously a lot of guys would be a gamble if you're making a trade for him, but that feels a little bit too much of a gamble, especially since the position he plays. I don't know if we necessarily need the help there either. So I'm not super interested, and whatever. That's if we got Iggy, it'd be cool, but otherwise I don't care too much.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same camp. I think there were some articles written about like the agreement they had with Memphis or whatever. So I'm going to be ill-informed talking about this, but it always felt weird to me this whole year that like this consummate professional or whatever is like, yeah, I'm not playing for this team. That would clearly like kind of like having some veterans around their young players. I'm not even like going to be around. So I don't know. That always struck me as kind of an odd thing. And I think go ahead.
Well, and I think there was another thing where it was pretty clear that his only destination was to go back to Golden State. And so if that's the case, like, again, if he gets traded to a different team, if it's a contender like Milwaukee, will that be enough for him to be like, okay, whatever, I'll suit up, or is it going to be a problem where, no, I still just want to go to Golden State, and he continues to pout, which, I mean, whatever, he can do that if he wants, but not exactly, I'm not sure if it really speaks well of him, but again, how much of it was early season. They were like, we'll just keep you reserved so we can see if we can trade you or find a destination for you somewhere. Maybe it wasn't even all that acrimonious, but just an agreement between the two, like you were saying.
Yeah. And I mean, listening to some like I was listening to the Dunked On mock trade deadline. The more I'm thinking about it, Kyle, the more it feels like it's just like, it's tough for the Bucks to even like find a person who's going to crack the rotation, who feels like worthwhile that they should be pushing their chips in for. It just feels like, and the trade deadlines felt really quiet so far. It feels like maybe we're leaning more towards the Bucks not making a move.
Yeah, between that and the cap shrinking, supposedly, well, I shouldn't say shrinking, but it's not going to increase as much as people thought going into next year. And with how relatively open the NBA quote unquote seems, I think those are the reasons why not a lot of teams are making home run moves. Now, I'm still expecting Philly to do something. I'm still expecting the Clippers to do something. I'm still expecting teams to make moves, but for the Bucks, I think the weirdest part is everyone keeps proposing these trades where you're trying to get a top 7 rotation guy, like a guy that's 6 or 8 in the rotation, and you try and give up the 12 and 13 people in DJ Wilson and Sterling Brown. I don't know where, and expecting to get something like that in return. That's where I think the biggest issue is that, I don't know, people are expecting we're going to somehow swindle a team and get someone that's one of the first guys off the bench, and we're going to trade our 2 under the bench guys that we don't play and have not shown substantial quality to justify making that move. It's like, we gotta stop doing that, you guys. No, I don't think any team is dumb enough to make that trade. And if it happens, great, I will be happy about it, but I don't think the Bucks are going to make the move, because the 2 players that they most likely should get rid of, it would be DJ Wilson and Sterling Brown, and what the market is for that, it's not worth trading, just unless you're going to get draft picks or you can get a salary dump.
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree, and especially when teams that are like really obviously trying to push their chips in and make a trade aren't operating from a position of leverage at the trade deadline. All the teams that can be sellers generally are able to just operate with all the leverage in those positions. So I'm leaning a little bit more towards that. Anything else on trade talk, since this will be the last time we'll talk about it, Riley, before the deadline hits?
No, not particularly. I mean, last season it was sort of a similar thing where I think a lot of people were like, well, this might be just a squad that we roll with, and then we ended up having Stanley Johnson for 30 seconds, and then we ended up with Nikola Mirotic, which was kind of a combination of a lot of different moves that got to that point. So maybe there's a last second move, but I agree with both you guys that it feels like at this point you'll roll your dice with what you have. And then the worst case scenario, you can maybe see if you can find something before the draft itself to trade out that pick, or maybe even there's a guy that they find compelling, in the 20s or whatever the pick ends up, and they end up going for that guy as a cost control piece. So I think probably at this point, just for roster construction purposes, they feel comfortable with where they're at, and then they like having a little bit of flexibility that the possibility of a draft pick gives them.
Yeah. So we will have to see. And moving on, we'll move to our next segment. It's time for rapid fire questions. Real quick, Riley, before you take over, I need to send an apology to my father, who does he does these like daily, while he's like not milking right now. It'll start again in March. He does these like daily question of the days to my whole family and has them ask us questions. And one of them last week was favorite cartoon, which I then stole for the rapid fire question last week and realized right after we stopped recording that I didn't give him credit. So this past Friday, he was driving and I got a call from him and I was like, oh my God, it was like in the middle of work. So I thought something was wrong. And he was like, hey, Adam, how are you doing? I was like, I'm doing pretty well. He's like, well, I'm listening to the podcast and I had to call in because I heard your question that you asked. And you didn't even say anything about me on it. Like you didn't even give me credit for it. And I was like, oh, I knew you were going to give me guff over that. So all credit to my father for the favorite cartoon question we used last week. Thank you, Dad. It was integral to completing the podcast. So anyway, all for you. I'll hand it over to you, Riley.
Mr. Paris, we want to give you a shout out for keeping your son grounded. Make sure he's not too big city. I know he's in Philadelphia. I know people are eating horse poop out on the streets. I want you to keep him grounded by keeping him calling in. So we do appreciate it. And I'm sure we would love to have you on as a guest at some point. Maybe in the off season, we'll have the parents will come on for an episode here or there. But beyond that, rapid fire this week, couple of quick ones. First off, will Chris score 40 or more points again in a game this regular season? And for context sake, he had the 51. I think the closest he's gotten otherwise was a 32-point outing this season. So do you guys believe he will get to 40 plus one more time this year?
I say yes, because I think there will be some games that Giannis will rest down the stretch.
I also had that same thought process, and we'll go with yes.
I'm a little skeptical because it took like one of the worst defenses in the entire league, like literally statistically the worst to get him there, but definitely a possibility. Number two, this I think is a good one. Championship is on the line. Let's say it's game 7. We're coming down to the final possession, and maybe it's like it's changed the situation so that either of these could be the game-winning play. But would you rather trust Giannis at the free throw line for 2 free throws or Brook Lopez wide open from 3?
Giannis at the free throw line.
Yeah, I'd also go with Giannis just because a free throw, it's easier to hit a free throw. And who knows, maybe Giannis will have a 10 of 12 type of game. I'll take the person that's shooting 60, 70% from closer than the guy that's bombing 30-foot jumpers and only hitting 29% of them.
Yeah, the numbers definitely do work in your favor, but I think we need to do some research on Brew Hoop. Like, do you guys, when you see Giannis dribble, does your confidence go up or down based on how many times he dribbles before each free throw? Because sometimes it's like 6, sometimes it's 17 dribbles, sometimes it's 30 dribbles before the free throw. And for me, the more times he dribbles before he takes it, the possibility that it makes it goes down significantly with each extra dribble.
Yeah, I was actually wondering that because I feel like when I was playing basketball, I took 3 dribbles, and I thought that was too many. So for Giannis to take 7, 8 free throws each time, it's like, how do you? I just feel like you lose concentration when that happens.
Oh, that would be a great question. What was your free throw routine? Mine was you spin the ball, have it come back to you, bounce it 3 dribbles, and you spin it again. So I was clearly more like on the Giannis end of it, like let me take my time. But we should do that investigation. Remember that old like the free throw 10-second violation subplot that was a couple years ago that everyone was talking about? I feel like we haven't had to hear about that in a while.
People complain about Giannis not getting superstar calls. I think the fact that he takes 5 minutes at the line every time he's there and nobody talks about it, that's the best kind of superstar call we're going to get. So I'm content with that. Another question, will Thanasis start another game this season?
No.
You think that was a one-off Greek heritage? Not going to see it ever again?
Well, I don't know. Maybe like one of the ones really at the end of the year. Like, I mean, if Bonzi Colson can start, like maybe there's a chance Thanasis can.
That's why I'm saying yes, because it's going to be a game where it's going to be an all bench and Thanasis starting at center. We're going to have Frank Mason. We're going to have Cam Reynolds, Dragan Bender. DJ Wilson won't be on the team, so that won't happen.
DJ will be in Oshkosh. DJ will be in Oshkosh for that one. Everybody else will get a start, though. DJ will not.
DJ will be in Detroit after the Bucks supposedly trade for Luke Kennard. Another fantasy that's not going to happen.
The best part about those bench games is like Kyle Korver and Urson still have to play like 25 minutes.
Yeah, they have to blow their bodies out right before the playoffs, like just because we need warm bodies for the sake of it. All right, two more questions. One more Bucks related. Who would you guys guess has the fourth highest point total on the Bucks this season? So the top three guys, pretty self-explanatory. It goes Giannis, Chris, Eric. Who would you guess is number 4 in points scored this season?
I'd probably go George Hill.
Same.
It's Brook Lopez with 464. George Hill is 5th with 428. Dante 6th at 387. So all relatively close, but Brook still continues to edge out George there.
Yeah, I guess it makes sense because Brook's played every game, right? Like at least every game he's been available for, he's played.
I believe he has, and
I don't think he's missed any.
I don't think he has either. And I think what's notable is I think George, especially when he's in, he does score a lot, but I don't think that's still his primary role. I still think his primary role is like just make sure the bench units don't implode while you're out there. Like if you can just make sure the other dudes get okay looks, that would be great. So it's not like he generally looks for his shot right away for the most part. And then the final question here, who's your Super Bowl pick? I know this will be coming out after it, so if we'll get like direct comparison whether or not you're right and wrong, but do you have a Super Bowl pick tonight?
I'm going to pick the Chiefs because my dad and my brother are both 49ers fans, and I don't want to hear them celebrate anything right now. So I'll pick the Chiefs. I also want to see Andy Reid get a Super Bowl ring. It would be kind of cool for him to finally get one after all the work he's put in the past like 20-something years.
Yeah, I'll go Chiefs as well. I'm kind of rooting for Andy Reid. I think that would be cool to see.
I have no rooting interest. I only watched the Packers game, a couple weeks ago, which seemed bad. So maybe, I don't know. Is Jimmy G a good player? Is he elite? Tune in next week when we discuss that. So that's all I got for rapid fire questions.
Wonderful. Well, speaking of elite, we had two of the elite talking to one another in France, Mark Lazary and Michael Jordan. It's time for a vulture talk, everyone. All right, Riley, take it from here.
So this is a weird one because it had nothing to do with Giannis whatsoever, but it was too noteworthy not to talk about because anytime you get some owner-on-owner drama, you got to go for it. And it's even better because Michael Jordan was involved. So last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess at this point, when the Bucks were in Paris, it was like a weird pregame press conference with Mark Lazary and Michael Jordan for some reason with the assembled European media. And apparently either before or after that press conference, Mark Lazary was talking to Michael Jordan and talking about how they're going to try and beat like both the Bulls regular season win record and win the championship and everything. And Michael Jordan, I mean, curmudgeon that he is, he said, don't worry so much about the regular season, go for the championship, which I think is like, solid advice, like pretty boilerplate stuff, but still all right. And apparently, according to Mark Lazary, I'm just going to read the quote because it's really good. So this is Mark Lazary speaking. And Michael Jordan goes, look, my advice to you is don't focus on beating a record. Focus on winning a championship. And Mark Lazary said, wow, that's great. Thank you for that. Just so you know, we're going to focus on beating your record and winning a championship. I think we should be doing everything, but that's me. Stiff arms the hell out of one of the greatest players of all time is like, yeah, get away from me, peasant. Like, we're going to win everything. So I thought, pretty on point for Lazary. It seems like that's within his wheelhouse for his braggadocious ownership style. But quite a set of something to tell Michael Jordan to piss off, essentially. So good stuff from Lazary, I guess. That's all I got. I don't know. Maybe Michael Jordan also said that Giannis would look good in a Charlotte's uniform, and that was before that quote. So man, there might be some beef if we need some tie-in for Vulture Talk. But that's what we got for ownership talk this week.
I just like how both owners now have just said something that you kind of just pause and think, are you sure you really should be big chesting yourself this much this soon? Because we had Wes Edens just throw the absolute shade at Philly, talk about the process versus the results, and now we have Mark Lazary. So now we just need Jamie Dynant to appear from the Shadow Realm and say something.
I'm a big Facitelli guy, so I'm waiting to hear what Mike Facitelli says.
I'm a huge Aaron Rodgers guy, so I'm just waiting for more tweets about Bucks and 6 or more. I think we don't talk enough about how Aaron Rodgers' ideal basketball player is Drew Gooden. We don't need to get into that. On
Drew
this
Gooden
podcast.
and Vlade Divac.
Yeah, it's a tough 1-2 combo. I mean, probably a creature of the era that he was most a fan of the NBA, but whatever. Yeah, now we just got to wait for Aaron to weigh in, I guess, and also say that Michael Jordan sucks. So whatever. Cool stuff from the ownership. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Riley. That was insightful. So we're going to look ahead at the games coming up this week. It is Tuesday at the Pelicans, Thursday versus the 76ers, Saturday at Orlando. Of course, the 76ers is the marquee out of those games, but we will get to hear about big boy Zion facing off against Giannis. Probably be some silly comparisons there. Kyle, what do you have for the record this week?
I'm going 3-0 because I think Milwaukee is better than the Pelicans. And considering as we're recording, this is before the Phoenix Suns game, and I have a bad feeling that the Bucks are going to lose to the Suns because A, it's the Suns, and B, it's at 1 p.m. So Milwaukee will want to get some revenge. And then Thursday against the Sixers, well, the Sixers are absolute frauds on the road, so that's an easy W. And then Orlando's tricky, but I think that's going to be a close game. I think Milwaukee will win by 6 or 7 points in that one. So give me 3-0.
I'm going to actually go pessimistic. I'm going to say this is going to be the first week where they really quote unquote stumble. I mean, obviously you don't stumble much when you won 41, but I think they'll go 1-2 this week. The reasoning is losses to the Pelicans and Sixers, and Pelicans because I think it's way too early for anybody to have a real clue how to defend Zion. And he's just kind of like a weird force physically where it's like, how do we defend this guy? What is he doing? He's kind of all over the place and big and huge and scary. So I think that'll be probably a loss, especially on the road. That's kind of a difficult spot to be. And then the Sixers, I mean, yeah, they're super fraudulent. Yeah, they're horrendous on the road, but I also thought they were super fraudulent and horrendous before the Christmas game, and they spanked the hell out of the Bucks. Now, maybe that reverses and the Bucks go for the revenge game, but seems like the Sixers are able to get up for games every once in a while. And so
not on the road,
maybe, but maybe it'll be unique for this one, national TV, blah, blah, blah. So I actually pick maybe the Bucks to lose that, and literally everybody will lose their minds after that. So that's my guesses.
Ooh, I like it. That's good. I'm going to go 2-1. I can see the loss against the Sixers again, and then, get them feeling high and mighty about their chances to beat us and everything, and people freaking out about how we won't be able to beat them and all that kind of stuff. Will we make a move to try and combat beating the 76ers? So I'm going to go 2-1 this week.
Well, I guess I'm going to have to carry. I know you guys are trying to be nicer to other teams, and I'm not of that ilk right now. They just lost by 21 to the Celtics on the road. Like, they are absolutely garbage on the road. I think it's kind of mystifying how they're so good at home, and yet they're 9-17 on the road.
Yeah, I wouldn't be maybe as concerned over like the course of a series, but for one-off games where it's like, oh, we only care about this, and I think we can all acknowledge that Embiid he's a force on both ends and makes life really difficult for Giannis. And then it's like, okay, is the usual gamble where are Chris and Eric able to step up, and Chris has been on it lately, and maybe Eric will use the snub as a fuel or something. I don't know, but I think there's enough where I'm not going to go in calling them necessarily frauds. Like, just what do the Bucks do that might be different, or is it we do the same exact thing and just hope that Philly doesn't shoot from lights out again from 3? So I think either way, win or loss, it'll be really interesting just because it has implications for down the road.
That's fair.
Agreed. Yep. I like any matchup with one of the potential Eastern Conference contenders. So should be a fascinating week for the Bucks. Trade deadline coming Friday. That big game against the Sixers on Thursday. That's going to do it for us. Follow us on Brewhoop at Brewhoop on Twitter. Go to brewhoop.com for all of the usual pieces. Brian's 5 observations, Riley's Monday morning media roundup, including he told us there's a sweet piece on Dante DiVincenzo on ESPN Plus if you're lucky enough to have that. I can't wait to finish recording and read that. And then also check out Mitchell Maurer has a really cool 3-part piece on the Bucks history with the long ball. So you're going to want to check brewhoop.com for that. Make sure to subscribe to us, share us with your friends, and we will be back next week. All right, we're out.